Hello. I know you're waiting for the nice lady to start singing, but Michael and I have a little pre discussion to have with you about this podcast. And Michael, we record this podcast, but we probably should give the audience a little bit of disclosure before they jump in.
Well, our story is like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
It is the Elon Musk versus Twitter litigation, and I can't wake up every day without some new twist or plot change. And so I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for audience members, when we record this, the lawsuit's still live. There are no other investigations going on. But this really, Michael, we're concentrating in a different area than the lawsuit itself and other investigations.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the lesson learned from the episode won't change regardless of the outcome. It's just I know when we listen back to this later, we're going to be laughing at all the different things that have probably happened since then.
All right, listeners, let's get going. Cue the opening lines.
Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. As you know, this season we're spicing things up a bit. We are here to talk about OPP, other people's problem.
Michael, for those listening for the first time this season, tell them what we're doing with OPP.
Well, instead of telling client stories that we've experienced and taking names out, we're telling public stories that are in the news, and we are going to then use those stories to glean some legal lessons that are hopefully very digestible for our audience.
Excellent, Michael. Well, before we get into today's OPP story, I'm going to ask you a question. And I think I know this to be true. You do own an iPhone, correct?
Yes, Brad. I don't think that qualifies as a humble brag anymore either, since I think almost the entire world owns an iPhone.
Okay. Well, so because you own an iPhone, you might have these things called apps, social media apps to be precise, like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, or even Twitter.
Yeah, and I have lots of kids, so translation, Facebook for old people. Yes, I have that. YouTube, of course. I've adopted YouTube. It's been around for a long time. Instagram, same, family pictures and work social media. Now you start getting into like TikTok and Snapchat. That's outside of my league. And then Twitter, believe it or not, I actually use that for getting the news.
Well, okay. So since we established that you're some type of social media tycoon with your Facebook account,
and Insta and Twitter, and I have a TikTok account.
All right. Well, so great. This makes life easier because I'm going to do another thing that you love the best is have another quiz for you today. And this was going to be on these different platforms. So are you ready?
This is like back a few seasons ago when you just talked about old movies every time. Now it's I'm going to quiz Michael every time.
It's so much fun because it really shows your intelligence.
Random questions.
All right, Michael, how many active users does Facebook have on a given month?
60 billion.
Wow, that's really close. However, audience members, he's wrong. Monthly active users is 2.9 billion. All right, so you're a little off.
At least I was in the billion.
Yes, you were correct in that one. I'll give you the B correct. Okay. Next question. How many active users does YouTube have on a given month?
60 billion.
Still a little high, Michael, but I appreciate your excitement when you answered it incorrectly again. No, 2 billion is what they have in a given month. So let's try one more. You say you have Instagram. So on Instagram, how many active monthly users are there?
60 billion.
Again, too high.
Oh, I'm just trying to be assertive and confident.
Riley, he looks assertive, doesn't he? Yeah, she's nodding her head, audience members. Okay. Monthly active users for Instagram is 1.3 billion. You say you're not that familiar with TikTok because you're an old man. How many do you think is on TikTok? And you cannot say 60 billion.
61 billion.
No, Michael, not 61 billion. It's actually TikTok monthly averages 1 billion. All right, last one, I promise. How many monthly active users are on Twitter in a given month?
Oh, Brad, I just want to give it. I'm going to say 1 billion.
Okay. Well, at least you came down off the 60 to 61. And actually, unfortunately, you're all wrong again. It's about 400 million people that use that particular social media platform.
Okay, I'm just begging you to stop, Brad.
Okay.
What does all this monthly active user quiz have to do with today?
All right. Thought you had never asked. So let's keep going down this rabbit hole with me. So it's interesting when you start looking at statistics of how social media platforms are utilized. So 9 out of every 10 people buy from brands that they follow on social media. So audience members, please follow us on social media. 73.5% of the internet users follow or research brands and products on social media. And 79% of people say user-generated content highly impacts their buying decisions.
Did you learn this in marketing school, Brad?
It was actually a marketing website, so that Siri had told me about.
Oh.
So this helps justify the company's super rich valuations because the promise is that these platforms will allow advertisers to obviously tap into their massive user bases. So more people, more eyeballs, which allows them to make money in the future.
Yeah, we somewhat touched on this when we've had, Silicon Valley talk, where it's not necessarily the dollar that affects value. Here, it's the larger the number of users, the more valuable the company.
Yeah. So the stock on those social media platforms are traded based on many different factors, but the numbers of users on that platform is a big deal.
All right. Well, they would have been really valuable if their numbers would have matched my guesses.
Yes, they're right now. Any people from the Facebook accounts and whatnot really want to have the 61 billion that you said. So, Michael, how many users does Twitter have on a given month?
A, I thought we were done. B, I'm going to go back to my litigation days and say objection, asked and answered. You've already asked me that exact question.
That's correct. I did even give you the answer, which is 400 million. The problem is if someone cannot verify the actual real people on the platform versus bots, which that can be a pretty big, huge issue, Michael. And that brings us to today's OPP story. All right, Michael. So today we have the world's richest man. He is known as a co-founder and CEO of Tesla. His name is Elon Musk.
Huh?
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of him. His net worth has been as high as $330 billion. Now it's fluctuated to about $278.4 billion. And for context purposes,
I love context.
You do like context. The second richest man in the world is the founder of something called Amazon. His name is Jeff Bezos, and he's only worth $165 billion, which is about $100 billion difference between him and Elon. In case you didn't know, Elon also likes tweeting on this thing called Twitter. He owns about 9% of Twitter, making him the largest shareholder of the company. And as some of the audience members probably have started to catch on, in April of 2022, Elon wanted to own all of Twitter.
Well, if we were a family law firm, we could have done a story on Jeff Bezos and him getting divorced because that cost him being in competition with Elon for world's richest man. I digress.
Yeah, you did.
If I remember correctly, going back to Elon Musk, he offered over $40 billion to buy Twitter. And I guess to say he offered it is almost an understatement. If I remember right, he actually tweeted that he made an offer to the board of directors.
You're actually correct in both, which has been unusual for this episode so far.
True. Getting my confidence.
There you go. On April 14th of 2022, Elon Musk offered to buy Twitter for $54.20 per share value of the company, valuing it at about $43 billion, according to the security filings. The offer amounted to basically a premium of about 38% of the price in which when Elon bought 9% of the company, and before it took public. So it's a big jump, basically, in valuation.
If I remember correctly, didn't Twitter try and prevent this from Elon from acquiring it? That seem to remember them talking about a poison pill that would allow the current stockholders to purchase additional shares at a discounted price. And really, it was all just a bunch of gyrations to block Elon from being able to pull this off.
Again, Michael, you're actually on a roll, Riley. We got to get that blue ribbon out for him. Yeah, that is correct again, Michael. Twitter did try to find some way to basically prevent Elon from buying the entire company. There was a lot of back and forth, but eventually they did eventually agree that they would sell to Elon. And once the deal was agreed that he would buy it, in typical Elon fashion, after the board accepted his offer, he then sent out a tweet said, "Next, I'm buying Coca-Cola to put the cocaine back in it."
Well, that escalated quickly, and very on brand for him to shoot that tweet out. Well, as we've discussed in other shows, now that the parties agreed to the deal, does not mean that the deal is done. And anybody that's watching the news probably is aware of that. Typically, the next step after you have this deal is the due diligence phase.
Yes, Michael. And you use probably the first vocabulary word besides billionaire, which I don't even know if we can define that one, but it's a lot. You said due diligence. Maybe you can tell our audience, what does due diligence mean?
Well, the layman's term is it's kind of the proctology exam that happens after you have a deal. And not a great visual there, but it is
thanks, Michael.
Very on par with what the experience is like. And it's with a buyer of the company is wanting to, at that point, make sure that what they think they're buying is what they're actually buying. And what that really means is comprehensive investigation and appraisal of the business by the buyer. They're looking at the business structure, the assets, the liabilities. They're looking at legal compliance, looking at the operations, both past and current. They're looking at obviously the potential from a commercial perspective for the business.
Mm-hmm.
And the due diligence stage is where the buyers can find leverage to renegotiate the deal, or if things are bad enough, back out entirely. And for sellers, this is the time to show the buyer that everything is in order, that everything that they think the buyer thinks they're getting is as is, and that the records kind of support the deal.
That's right. Good job, Michael. Yeah, and so for today's OPP story, this is the phase where we call when their wheels just start coming off the deal.
Yes, Brad, that is true. And at the opening of the show, when you were making me feel bad because I couldn't get the numbers right,
60 billion.
We were talking a lot about monthly users and the value each user can provide to a social media platform. And then you asked me the bot question earlier, which was not fair. And by the way, you didn't even tell anybody what a bot is.
What is a bot, Michael?
You're the one that said it, not me. Sounds technical.
Yeah, it is. It's very technical.
But that actually is the reason that Elon pulled out of the Twitter deal.
Yeah, and for audience members that don't know what bots are basically robots, and robots being that something that's fake, it's not a real person. So remember going back having eyeballs. If you're having a bot, that just means it's a computer generated account versus an actual real account. And so that really,
like your girlfriend from high school.
She was real. She was just hanging out with your girlfriend in Niagara Falls sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that.
So let's go back to, the real question really starts coming back to is, while this was going on, almost a month after making this offer, Elon, Mr. Musk, who likes to tweet, started tweeting out that this deal to buy Twitter was temporarily on hold, citing concerns of what he was saying was the prevailing amount of bots and spam on the platform. And along with this tweet, Musk posted a Reuters report on a public filing that Twitter earlier had in May, said that the fake accounts may be up less than 5% of the actual users on this platform, meaning that 5% of the users are just fake accounts. This spurred Musk to demand details supporting the calculation that about these fake accounts to really figure out who are the number of actual human beings who are Twitter users. Basically, for the first time, he was noting that he's worried about these fake accounts.
Yeah, and let me say this back to you to make sure I'm following it. But he's basically saying, hey, you Twitter made this public filing that said less than 5% of our users are fake because they're these bots. And he sets that as the bar in his due diligence phase to say if it's greater than that, then we've got a problem.
You got it, yeah.
Right? So I read that many people thought that this was, in fact, a tactic for Elon to bargain for a lower price for the acquisition or even abandon the effort altogether.
Yeah, and it could have been. There's actually I read a whole bunch of articles when we were preparing for this. Another one talked about that when he made the offer, he also sold a huge portion of Tesla, and maybe he was using that as a means that may not make people panic as to why is he selling so much
Oh, wow.
of Tesla. So yeah, there's a lot of theories out there, but let's stay with this particular story and thread. Is that the weeks kept progressing while the deal was on hold, and then Musk kept threatening Twitter that if they didn't provide this additional information that he needed to really determine the bots, he might walk the deal. Now, Twitter kept saying, "Well, hey, we're acting, in accordance with the terms of the merger agreement," which means no. And then Musk said, finally, basically, and all via tweets, I'm going to walk away from this deal because you guys are in breach of it. You're not providing me the data that I need, and I can't really evaluate this investment. And so Twitter finally said, fine, we'll hand over. And this is my favorite part of it. They handed over a fire hose, air quoting that, of data.
Well, I mean, that would seem promising that they finally relented and gave him what he was asking for, so that he could verify, so that he would have all the data that he was asking for.
Yes, and as some lawyers know, sometimes getting the term used, document dump, is really not as great as it sounds. And
needle in a haystack.
Yes, and so according to Musk attorneys, when they started going through they released a statement saying, "Hey, we've been asking for stuff for months, and we're trying to get this data that's necessary for us to really evaluate from an independent assessment, the due diligence as you were talking about, is how many fake or spam accounts does this Twitter platform have?" And they said this, we just can't figure it out. But and this is fundamental to us as to what is the true value of Twitter's business from a financial perspective. And if we can't figure this out, we can't close this deal that we contemplated originally from these two parties.
Yeah, Twitter has repeatedly said that it has cooperatively shared information with Musk in order to close the deal at the originally agreed upon terms.
Oh, yeah.
Many experts believe Elon was setting up the use of a $1 billion breakup fee in the event that this fell through, of course, or trying to just get out of it altogether.
All possibilities. And so fast forward to July 8th, Elon tells Twitter, also via tweet, that he's killing the deal. Twitter tells Elon, "Hey, no takebacks. You have to buy us for $44 billion. You offer it," even though the company's valuation has actually at this point decreased dramatically.
I know, Brad, that we're pretty simple as attorneys, but I'm pretty sure there's not a legal theory out there called no takebacks.
Probably correct. Again, today you're on a roll. Well, what Twitter actually said to Elon was, "Hey, this is a breach of the agreement. You cannot terminate this deal based on what you're referencing, and we're going to go to the judge." Audience members probably know they did, and we're going to force you to buy us at the asking price or at the price we agreed to.
Well, we're all getting to watch this play out in real time, most of it on Twitter.
Yes.
And it is a constantly evolving case, and probably the story is, who knows how far it's been written so far. But let's hit the pause button. Let's go into commercial. And on the other side, let's take this very public story and all the kind of stuff that's usually private coming out on Twitter and talk about how in real time that actually affects, impacts deals that we see all the time.
Absolutely.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Well, welcome back to the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, this season, our theme is OPP. We just walked through a very public offering of a company being acquired by, actually, in this case, one of their shareholders. And since, audience members that you'll probably know, we're not litigators. So we're not going to concentrate on the actual trial at hand or the litigation and all the filings going back and forth and as to what's happened since then. To us, it's really a reflection, Michael, looking back as to this real public offering to buy a company and then what happened.
Yeah, I mean, our clients are closely held private companies, and so the typical phases of an M&A deal are private.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done episodes where we talk about what an M&A deal can look like, but this actually in real time on Twitter can show you the due diligence happening and the back and forth fight that's happening. And I don't know, maybe I need to start tweeting in real time about you whenever we're running the law firm, just so I can, keep it real.
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, these deals typically they're unpacked between lawyers and business people via emails and calls and Zoom meetings. They don't happen in the public sphere, especially with these closely held private companies. I mean, you'll enter into something called a letter of intent. And part of that letter of intent, there's certain binding aspects of the LOI. And part of that is to keep the deal private.
Right. And, you said LOI or letter of intent. For our audience that does not know, a letter of intent or LOI is a document which outlines kind of the key aspects of a potential deal. What is each party looking for? How the deal should be structured. The lawyers call them the material terms, but it's the bones of why are you doing this deal, and you'll sometimes see them called a memorandum of understanding or even a confidential term summary. But you routinely see that the idea of it being confidential, and then the other idea is that these are the big points of the structure of what's going to be happening. You're trying to set expectations and all make sure you're on the same page before you spend the time and energy that it would take to close a deal. And so we actually talked about this in the red flag season. We had an episode on non-binding letters of intent and that the LOIs can be deceptive. And actually, there are actually binding clauses in a non-binding letter of intent.
Yeah, and a really good LOI, audience members, it should be modeling out all these extremely important aspects of the deal that is important to you. What are those financial terms? What is that structure going to look like? What type of post-sale handcuffs like covenants, not compete, non-solicitation will be in it? What are the expectations and timeframes that you plan to go through with your due diligence?
Yeah, I mean, and let's focus on the due diligence expectation set in LOI. It's so critical, and it's such an important step in the M&A deal. It's the point in time where you can actually figure out if reality matches what you think it is in the offer sheet. And we've done plenty of episodes on we've got to hurry up and close type concept where the due diligence is skipped because it's got to happen fast. And they obviously made the podcast episode because something went terribly wrong.
Yes,
there are probably sometimes that it does work out, but your risk escalates if you don't look and see what you're actually buying if you're the buyer.
Yes, I completely agree. I would never recommend, if you can, waiving your M&A portion of a deal. This is the whole part of the deal where it's the whole concept that, when somebody says, well, why do I have to do this? You're like, well, I trust you, but I'd like to verify that too.
Yeah.
So trust but verify. And as you mentioned in other shows, this is really that moment where we've talked about where the seller really needs to open up their underwear drawers and really show the buyer everything. And in this case with Elon, he kept asking, hey, I need to figure out how much y'all really think are bots versus humans because I'm putting a price tag on it. And so while negotiating an LOI, the parties really need to step back and build this into the LOI and as to what's the expectation delivery, what's the time frame they want. When do you want to start the due diligence phase? When you want to complete it? Are there ways to extend it? So all those are kind of things.
And so talk about the time frame on due diligence. What does that usually look like?
Yeah, and you were talking, it really depends on the deal and what's happening in the speed, but the minimum is 30 days. As the attorneys, we like to, push it out to 120 days. It doesn't mean it takes that entire time, but a typical deal, you probably see around 90 days. And clearly as a seller, You want to normally push it as fast as possible because you're ready to sell. And sometimes, as you know, the buyer wants to do the same thing because they're ready to move forward. But as a buyer, you should want to be at a request time because you want to make sure that you're going to get all the information that you need during this stage to make sure that you have what you need to say this price is good.
Yeah, I mean, and if you run out of time, you can ask for more time. Now, the risk is that the other party won't allow it, and then that forces your hand to make the deal not happen. And then depending on what the letter of intent says in these deals, there's consequences. In Elon's case, it's potentially a $1 billion consequence. Of course, they want the no take back strategy, so it might be a $44 or $43 billion consequence.
Yeah, that's correct. And during this due diligence phase, the seller really discloses if they don't really seem to be adequate, like, hey, I'm not, they're dodging what they're being asked to give. And they're not really, you keep asking for the same information, they're not going to give you. And that's really typical for this type of transaction. You need that. You, the buyer, in a good LOI, you're not going to have any obligations to follow through with this deal.
So what could the buyer do besides request more time if they're not getting the information they need?
So obviously, if they don't provide the information, if the seller won't provide that information that you requested, and they seem to be hiding certain pertinent facts, this could be a material breach of an LOI, and the buyer typically has options of, number one, just terminating the deal, just walk away, or they could make a different offer, normally lowering the price, or they can move forward understanding there's a risk associated with this, and it's higher than they actually anticipated because they actually don't have all the information they need to really make an informed decision. But typically, the buyer will be well within their rights to terminate and demand return of a good faith deposit if the seller will not turn over the information being requested.
And talk about the breakup fee.
Yeah, and so some of these deals, so in this Elon deal, the perfect example is that if you walk away with not a real good reason, you're going to have to pay a breakup fee. And in this case, if you're like, well, I'm breaking up because you won't give me the information I need, that should be voided. And so again, that's depends how it's negotiated. But if you're not negotiating good faith, if you won't give me the information, I want to walk away and I want my money back because you were never intending to give me the information I needed to make sure that the worth I'm providing is correct. Michael, we're almost out of time today. So tell me some of your final thoughts today.
Well, I think what's really cool about the Elon story as it relates to what the points we're trying to make on an M&A deal is you started this episode very meanly picking on me and asking questions I had no way to answer. You wouldn't let me talk to Siri, yes. But you made an illustration about how valuable the number of users are to the value of these companies. Yeah. And so when you're talking about bots, which kind of doesn't sound like that big of a deal, it's a huge deal if what the value of the company is based on the number of users, and they're half of them are fake, or however many of them are fake, more than what they thought. So that's why, again, Elon set the stage at, well, you said it's less than 5%, so anything more than that is something that would theoretically significantly impact the value. And kind of taking that concept, understanding that when you're doing a deal, so if you're a medical practice, there may be things in your numbers that you try to dress up to look really good. And in due diligence, they're going to do kind of a quality of earnings analysis and see, is this real, or is this not real? And in healthcare, you see all sorts of issues. We hear of the pump and dump, blow up the value of the practice, and how those can go wrong. So it's important to understand that there's so much to understand, to gain from the due diligence. You really want to focus on looking at those things that impact the value of what you're buying.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that goes back to something we always talk about, is that the value, if you're the buyer, you want to prove the fact that you've got everything. And if you refuse to turn stuff over, if you want them to prove that it's worth, and if the seller won't give you the information you need, that's problematic. And you, the seller, if you're getting ready to go to market, you need to be prepared to go back and clean up get your house in order if if you don't think your numbers look good, or you don't think you have some compliance concerns or structural concerns. I know we've talked about that in other episodes, but yeah, getting your house in order is so critical before you go to market.
Totally agree.
Well, audience members, that is all the time we have today, but we'll be back next Wednesday, where our OPP story will have discussed 300 million reasons why the federal government likes using wiretaps. We'll bring on our good friend and white-collar attorney, Sarah Werski, to help us break it down.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.